I turned 18 on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, my stepmother was demanding rent. That alone should tell you everything. We lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. Not the beachy postcards and boardwalks part, but the stretch inland where strip malls fade into cracked pavement and the cicadas hum louder than the traffic. That house on East Bluff had been my only constant. I mowed its lawn since I was 10, patched its peeling siding since I was 12, and practically became its janitor by 16. Meanwhile, her kids, my step-siblings, learned early that laziness had no consequences if your mom wore the crown at home. She had this fake smile when she told me I need to start contributing now that I was a man. Called it symbolic, like she was giving me some rite of passage. I didn't say anything at first, just nodded and walked upstairs. But something had cracked wide open inside me. See, what she didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that the deed had been in my name since I was 13. A quiet gift from my grandparents before they passed, structured through a trust that bypassed my father completely. They never trusted her. Turns out, they were right. I remember standing in the doorway of the bedroom I grew up in, staring at those beige walls and feeling this weird kind of grief. Not for them, for the version of me that thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earn a place in that family. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder, the one my grandparents' lawyer mailed me every year on my birthday, like clockwork. I never opened it. Not once. I guess part of me was scared it would all vanish if I read it too closely. But now I needed it. Inside was the deed, plain as day. My name, Jake Whitlow, in neat block letters. A trust statement. A letter from my grandfather, dated just 2 weeks before he died, typed but signed in blue ink. He wrote about legacy and strength, and how some families don't get built, they're chosen. That line stuck with me. Some families don't get built, they're chosen. I'd spent most of my childhood trying to wedge myself into something that didn't want me. And the old man knew that. Maybe that's why he made sure I'd always have something that was mine. When I showed her the folder the next morning, she laughed. She thought I was bluffing. Then she saw the seal. The color drained from her face like I'd poured bleach over her arrogance. Her voice cracked when she asked what this meant. I told her calmly, with a politeness that didn't match the bitterness in my chest, that it meant she and her kids would either start paying rent or find somewhere else to live. They were gone by the end of the week. After they left, the silence in the house wasn't just quiet. It was accusing. Like the walls themselves were wondering what I'd done. Not that I regretted it. I didn't. Not in the way most people mean when they say that. But there's a kind of grief that comes from being right. A sharp, cold kind that leaves no satisfaction. I spent the first night alone in the living room. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own bed. It felt too clean, too untouched, like it belonged to someone else now. So I sat on the old couch, the one her kids had stained with grape juice and ground goldfish crackers into, and just listened. To the creaks in the ceiling, to the hum of the refrigerator, to the absence. The next morning, I wandered room to room like a stranger. Their rooms were still full of life, dirty laundry, crumpled posters, socks in corners like they'd evaporated mid-step. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway. That cheap floral spray she overused to feel expensive. I could have thrown everything out, boxed it up, and dumped it at Goodwill, but I didn't. Not yet. Something about touching their things felt too intimate. Like I was violating a contract I never agreed to sign. In the kitchen, I found the chore chart she used to tape to the fridge, the one with stars for her kids and blank spaces for me. I'd once joked about it to her, said I was too old for sticker rewards. She just smiled like I should be grateful to be included at all. That damn chart was still there, curling at the edges, as if waiting for someone to earn their keep. And then there was the garage. I don't know why I went in there. Habit, maybe. It was always my refuge when I needed to be invisible. The one place in the house that still smelled like wood and oil instead of scented candles and sour teenage attitude. My father's old toolbox sat on a shelf where I left it years ago, untouched, rusted, the latches stiff with time. I opened it slowly, half expecting some memory to jump out at me. But it was empty. Just a few loose screws and a wrench that didn't fit anything anymore. I sat on the concrete floor and let the cold crawl into my spine. Looked at the cracks spreading across the ground like veins or fault lines. Thought about how many times I'd swept that garage. How many times I'd fixed things in this house, trying to hold it together with duct tape and optimism. And for what? They never said thank you. Not once. I realized that as I sat there with dirt under my nails and dust in my lungs. I've been the backbone of a house that saw me as background noise. A convenient extra set of hands. Never a son. Never a brother. Just useful. A week after they left, I found a key under the sink, taped to the back of an old plumbing manual. Her handwriting, tight and slanted, labeled it spare, just in case. I stared at it for a long time. That little piece of metal had outlasted the woman who put it there. Somehow that made me laugh. Not a happy laugh, the other kind. The tired kind you let out when irony smacks you upside the head. I held the key in my hand and realized something strange. I didn't know what door it opened. It wasn't for the front. Not the back either. Maybe the shed? Maybe a lockbox I hadn't found yet? For someone who'd lived in this house my entire adolescence, I suddenly felt like I barely knew it. That night it got cold. First real snap of fall in Wilmington, and the heat didn't kick on. I checked the thermostat. Nothing. Furnace was dead. I sat in the hallway, back against the wall, arms wrapped around my knees, thinking, maybe this is the house mourning too. Maybe it didn't know how to run without someone yelling and stomping and leaving dishes in the sink. I wrapped myself in a blanket and slept on the couch again. The silence was heavier than usual. Not just absence, consequence. And under it all, a weird sort of freedom. Like I could finally breathe, even if the air burned a little going in. The envelope came on a Saturday morning, thick and serious, the kind with a barcode on the back and a return address that made my stomach tighten. Evanston, Illinois. I sat at the kitchen table, same spot where my stepmother once laid out bills with my name scribbled on them, and opened it slowly. Inside, a formal letter. Northwestern University. I'd been accepted. I didn't even remember applying. I'd done it during a night of quiet desperation 2 months earlier, holed up in my room while her kids fought over a PlayStation controller and she blasted reality TV from the living room. I had thought, what if I left? Now it wasn't a question anymore. It was a map. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. My hand was shaking a little, not from fear, from disbelief. After everything, someone had said yes. Someone wanted me not because I was useful or quiet or easy to ignore, but because I was enough. That day, I walked the whole neighborhood, past the busted mailboxes and cracked sidewalks, the grocery store where they always sent me with crumpled coupons, the diner where I used to sit alone after school because going home felt heavier than just waiting. I ended up at the park on 3rd in Magnolia, sat on the swings like I was 10 again, and let the wind do what it wanted with my hair. I didn't smile. I just breathed. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Part of me didn't want to give them the satisfaction or the chance to sabotage it, because I knew how that would go. They'd act supportive, throw a little farewell dinner, maybe even bake a cake with too much frosting. But beneath it would be resentment. Not because I was leaving, but because I was leaving on my terms. And that was new. For once, no one else was writing the story for me. About a week before my move to Evanston, I found myself standing in the middle of the empty living room, holding a manila folder again. Not the deed this time, but something more transactional. A lease agreement. I had decided to rent the house. It wasn't out of spite. Well, not entirely. I could have sold it, cut ties completely, walked away from this place like it was just another bad memory. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something about keeping the house, my house, felt like reclaiming more than a physical space. It was a declaration. I'd spent years being the one who cleaned up after everyone else's mess. Now I got to decide who walked through that front door. I listed it online. Modest rent, long-term preferred, no pets. Within 3 days, I had a young couple come by. She was a nurse. He worked at a tire shop. They had a beat-up Corolla, nervous smiles, and a baby on the way. When I showed them around, the woman paused in the kitchen, her hand brushing over the countertop like she was picturing Sunday mornings there. He asked if the furnace worked. I laughed, then told him I'd fixed it last week. They signed the lease 2 days later. I gave him the keys and wished them well. And as I watched them pull out of the driveway with grocery bags and a borrowed U-Haul, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, closure. Funny thing about turning the page, sometimes you don't even realize you've been stuck until the story starts to move again. I left Wilmington on a Wednesday, just after sunrise. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine needles, and the house, now quiet, rented, full of someone else's beginnings, stood behind me like a memory already fading. I didn't tell my father I was leaving. Didn't leave a note. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally accepted he wasn't listening and maybe never had been. For years, I waited for him to notice things. Not big things, not birthdays or achievements, but small ones. When I stopped asking for help with my homework. When I started drinking coffee instead of orange juice at breakfast. When I fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom without telling anyone. He never noticed. Or maybe he did and just thought it was easier not to say anything. The day I moved out, I drove past his job. Just once. He worked at the hardware store on Gordon Road. Part-time now, ever since his back gave out. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, engine running, watching through the glass as he stocked shelves, slow and stiff. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, like time had folded him in. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, when I thought about going in, saying something, anything, but the weight of all those years pressed against my chest, and I couldn't make my hand reach for the door. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. There's a difference. I drove north until the trees changed, until the air tasted different, until the silence in my car stopped feeling empty and started feeling earned. In the rearview mirror, Wilmington disappeared, not like a city, but like a chapter, like something that happened to someone I used to be. Evanston didn't greet me with open arms. It didn't welcome me like a movie montage or a dorm bulletin board overflowing with invitations. It was gray, cold, even in early fall. The kind of cold that slips into your sleeves and reminds you that no matter how far you drive, some kinds of loneliness follow. I moved into a studio above a bookstore that smelled like old glue and coffee grounds. The landlord, a man with a voice like torn paper, handed me the keys without looking up from his crossword. The place had character, chipped tiles, one working window, and a radiator that hissed like it held a grudge. Still, it was mine. Mine in a way no place had ever been. No one else's name on the mailbox. No one else's expectations taped to the fridge. My first night, I slept on a borrowed mattress with no frame. Ate cold leftovers from a Tupperware container because the gas line hadn't been turned on yet. I wasn't miserable. I was stripped down to the frame. And sometimes, starting bare is better than starting broken. At orientation, I said as little as possible. Everyone seemed impossibly young and impossibly loud. They laughed in bursts, talked over each other, already sorting themselves into tribes. I lingered on the edge of every conversation like an extra in someone else's story. But no one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. That was fine, too. I spent most evenings walking the streets around campus. Not out of wonder, but out of restlessness. The kind that hums in your bones when everything inside is trying to settle, but hasn't quite landed. One night, I found a bench near the lake. Sat there until my hands went numb. Watched the lights from Chicago blur across the water. Wondered what it might be like to feel wanted, not needed, not tolerated, but truly wanted. Back in the apartment, I unpacked slowly. One book at a time. One fork in a drawer. I tacked my acceptance letter above the desk. Not for pride, but proof. I made it this far. I had the paper to show it. Sometimes that has to be enough. It's always the little things that drag ghosts out of their hiding places. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I stepped out of the seminar room. We've been discussing the ethics of memory in literature, how stories reshape trauma, how forgetting becomes a kind of survival. I remember thinking that was the first time a professor said something that actually stuck, that forgetting could be an act of healing, that silence could be intentional. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it, but something about the timing made my stomach twist. I listened to the voicemail sitting on a bench near the library, wind pulling at the edges of my coat. Students streaming past with their scarves and notebooks and loud laughter that didn't include me. It was her, my stepmother. Her voice was softer than I remembered, like she was talking to someone who might hang up before she finished. She said she hoped I was well, said my father had been asking about me, though she didn't say how often or in what tone. Then she mentioned the furnace, said it stopped working again, that they weren't sure what to do. She didn't say, "Can you come fix it?" She didn't have to. That's how she always spoke when she needed something, with the language of implication. Guilt dressed up as affection, obligation packaged as concern. I sat there a long time after the message ended, the cold seeping through the bench into my bones. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel much at all, not even surprise. Just a kind of dull ache like pressing on a bruise that should have healed by now, but hasn't. For years, I'd been the one they called when the garbage disposal jammed, when the sink leaked, when the internet went out, or the power bill needed covering. I was the fixer, the unpaid labor, the spare son when things needed doing. And for years, I answered, dropped everything, canceled plans, skipped meals, took on second shifts, all because a part of me believed that showing up was the only way to be loved. But love, I see that now, shouldn't feel like servitude. I didn't call her back, not out of spite. That would have required heat. This was colder, simpler. I deleted the message, blocked the number. Then I turned off my phone entirely and sat there in the late afternoon gray, letting myself not be needed. Back in my studio, I poured hot water over cheap ramen, sat on the floor, and stared at the spot on the wall where sunlight used to hit in the mornings. That little golden square had been disappearing earlier each day, a reminder that winter was coming. I need to get a coat soon. One of my own. One not handed down or borrowed. One I chose. Later, I opened my email out of habit. One unread message sat at the top of my inbox. From the couple I'd rented the house to. Just a quick update. They love the neighborhood. The baby was due in a month. They'd painted the back bedroom yellow. I read the email 3 times. Not because it was long or emotional. It wasn't. But because it felt clean. No strings. No guilt. Just gratitude. I closed my laptop and sat with that feeling. Gratitude. Something I never learned to expect from the people who raised me. But maybe I could learn it now. There's something strange about being in a place where no one knows your history. Not your awkward years. Not your quiet endurance. Not your father's long absences or your stepmother's sharp smiles. They don't know how many chores you did without being asked. They don't know you learned to fix a furnace at 14. They don't know how heavy it felt to grow up in someone else's house, always careful not to take up too much space. And that kind of anonymity? It's terrifying, but it's also freedom. At Northwestern, I started introducing myself with my full name. Jake Whitlow. Not just Jake. Not just the kid who helps out around the house. Not her stepson. Just me. And slowly, I started to believe that was enough. I made a friend in one of my lit classes, Theo from Milwaukee. He had a laugh that cracked like glass and a habit of underlining every other sentence in his book. We didn't talk much at first, but one day, he caught me staying late in the library and handed me a granola bar without a word. Just placed it on the table and kept walking. It was a small thing, but it felt honest. No angle. No performance. Weeks passed. Classes blurred together. I started raising my hand more. Not for attention, just to hear my own voice in the room and see if it still sounded like mine. I got a part-time job at a campus bookstore, shelving poetry collections and dodging customers. I liked the rhythm of it, the quiet repetition, the sense that things had a place. One night, after a long shift, I found myself standing in the poetry aisle, holding a battered copy of Mary Oliver. I opened to a random page. The poem asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I didn't have an answer, but I whispered the question to myself anyway. I think that's where it started. Not the healing, but the reckoning. Realizing that no one was coming to hand me the life I wanted. That if I wanted to be more than the sum of all I'd endured, I'd have to build it myself. Slowly, quietly, without applause. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. A few days ago, I got an email with a photo attached. It was from the couple renting my old house. The baby had been born, a boy, with hair the color of my grandfather's. They'd planted marigolds in the front yard. Said the neighbors had been kind. Said the furnace was still working. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Not because it made me sad, because it didn't. There they were, standing on the front steps, the same steps I scrubbed 1,000 times, the same ones I once sat on in the rain with scraped knees and a mouth full of silence. And now, a different family, a different story. No ghosts, just sunlight and new shoes. I closed the laptop and looked around my studio. Still small, still quiet, but no longer temporary. My books had multiplied. There was a second-hand chair by the window now. A coffee mug with a chipped rim I refused to replace. The little things that told me I was no longer passing through. I was staying. I was becoming. I still think about them sometimes. My father, her, the kids. I wonder where they landed, what stories they tell about me now. Maybe in their version, I'm the ungrateful one, the cold one who turned his back. Maybe that's fine. Maybe we all get to rewrite things just a little to survive them. But here's what I know. There's a house in Wilmington that doesn't haunt me anymore. There's a life unfolding here, one I chose with both hands. And there's a boy I used to be, quiet, bruised, waiting to be seen, who finally stepped out of the shadows, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply to live. That's enough.